About 60% of Ireland is in grassland agriculture, supporting 150,000 family farms, which have been the lifeblood of rural Ireland since the beginnings of our civilization. Ireland's unique mild, temperate and wet climate make for extraordinary conditions for growing grass. And this has been at the heart of our agricultural system, making livestock the dominant farming of choice in Ireland. The problem is, this particular type of farming can have a disproportionately high environmental impact, and Ireland's climate change targets have put our agricultural system into sharp focus. There is genuine frustration and fear in rural communities about what our farmers will be asked to do in order to meet our climate change targets. The debate around what should happen in farming is rapidly becoming fraught and polarised. In this episode, we'll explore how far Ireland's agricultural sector can go to meet our climate change targets and what this could mean for our farming community. Ireland's unique climate and soil conditions have meant that grassland livestock has been the predominant farming of choice here, going back thousands of years. In an effort to keep up with global competition, many Irish farmers have been encouraged to drive production higher and higher. More production has led to increased spreading of synthetic fertilisers and huge quantities of imported feeds, which has driven Irish farming to being one of our biggest sources of environmental degradation. So, what can be done to maintain the viability of Irish farming while lowering the impact on our environment? At Dowth Research Farm, a team of scientists led by Dr. Connie Grace, they have laid out 84 trial plots for growing different grass types with varying inputs of nitrogen fertiliser.
So this is actually one that has been here. This is typically was here for hundreds of years, maybe.
For as long as we know,
right.
So up to 30 different species within this sward.
Yeah, I can see there's many species here.
Absolutely.
These are all native species.
They're
too.
all native species and occur naturally on this site.
Right.
The simple measure of balancing the soil acidity by spreading lime has doubled the yield of this natural grass sward.
So we're able to produce about 8 tonne of dry matter per hectare.
8 tonne?
Yeah.
That's big improvement, isn't it?
Huge improvement.
Yeah, but it's gone from 4 to 8. Okay, so now we're looking at this one. What is this one here?
So this one is a perennial ryegrass monoculture, which is very typical on all farms in Ireland at the moment. This is what farmers have been advised to do because ryegrass monocultures are capable of really high dry matter yield. The only thing about ryegrass monocultures, it needs a lot of chemical nitrogen fertiliser.
So the yield is how much here then? How many tonnes per hectare?
So this sward is capable of producing about 11 tonne of dry matter per hectare.
Right, so we've gone from 4 before any intervention up to 8.
Yep.
Now we're at 11 tonnes per hectare here, and it is giving you more yield, there's no doubt, but it's costing the farmers a lot of money.
These ryegrasses are heavily dependent on the spreading of nitrogen fertiliser, which is one of the most damaging parts of Ireland's agri-food system, impacting air pollution, water quality, as well as exacerbating agriculture's greenhouse gas footprint.
So what have we got here?
So what you're looking at is a combination of grasses, legumes and herbs. We 2 legumes in here, red and white clover. So both of these contribute to the sward greatly by taking nitrogen out of the atmosphere.
So they're taking nitrogen from the air, basically. Air is made up of 80% nitrogen.
Yes, exactly.
And they're able to take that up from the air without chemicals and fix it in the soil.
And as a result of that, produce higher dry matter yields from a lot less chemical nitrogen fertiliser.
Right, so it's a much more natural way of doing it.
Absolutely.
Now, will this yield quite a lot of grass now?
So last year on the multi-species sward, we just grew short of 14 tonne.
14? So we've now gone from 4 to 8 to 11 to 14.
Absolutely, yeah. And basically what we found is from 60% less fertiliser, we're growing about 40% more herbage.
40% more herbage, which means more...
Dry matter, more grass.
Wow. So this is actually yielding much more than the ryegrass.
Yeah.
Okay, now what if you didn't put any nitrogen on this? What would happen?
I suppose where you might struggle is early in the year. They'll only fix nitrogen or make their own nitrogen when soil temperatures are above 8 degrees.
Just for that early stage though?
Just for the early stage. And I suppose what you could do, and what we're looking at doing here, is replacing the synthetic fertiliser or the bagged fertiliser with slurries.
This is really, really fantastic what you're doing here. Could all farmers in Ireland do this?
Why not? Probably the biggest thing that we hear from farmers is, oh no, that looks like weeds, that won't work for me, I don't like that. But I suppose then you start talking about, wait a second now, we've reduced the nitrogen fertiliser by 60%, we're producing more dry matter yield, animals are performing better. And then all of a sudden they say, actually, do you know what, maybe I could chance a paddock or two of that. And the mindset does change when you produce the facts and produce the results, especially with the rising prices of fertiliser and also the pressures on the environment.
And could another barrier be a situation where the big chemical fertiliser companies are advertising their product, whereas this doesn't get any advertising?
Well, I suppose there's no particular person that's going to gain from sowing swards like this, only the farmer themselves.
If we could adopt these multi-species grass swards across the country to cut out nitrogen completely, it could mean a dramatic lowering of agriculture's environmental impacts without hitting farmers' profits. However, without the curtailment of nitrogen fertiliser, efficiency gains could result in cattle numbers and emissions increasing instead of decreasing. But the climate change impact of Irish farming stretches far past that of nitrogen fertilisers. David Hagan is a research specialist here at Dowth who is measuring the carbon balance on this farm.
So David, what we're here to find out is how can a farm like this, an intensive farm, reduce carbon emissions?
So what we're doing is, one, we're breeding better cows. So that's a thing that happens year on year. You breed for the more efficient cow that's going to produce more beef from the same amount of input. On the farm here, we create a baseline. We measured all our trees with a technology called LiDAR. It gives us a volume of all the trees.
The biomass?
All the biomass, exactly. And we've done that again, and simply put, those trees have grown. And that's done over more planting, managing our hedgerows in different ways, promoting carbon sequestration. And they have sequestered that carbon on this farm while those cattle have been there at the same time.
And I notice you've got 2 sods here dug here. Yeah. Where did you get these sods from?
So this is the multi-species sward, and I took this from this paddock. This is perennial ryegrass, which is the standard agricultural performance in Ireland. It's taken from the paddock next door. So if we look on this soil, we have a very fine rooting structure and it's near the top. You see these roots here are bigger and chunkier and they go down a bit deeper.
I also noticed more worms here. Actually, I don't see any worms in this.
No, there's less worms in that now, but the worms are in with the multi-species swards because there's more food here for them. See the roots? Yeah. When a plant grows in soil, it wants to extract the maximum amount of nutrients from it. It emits an acidic substance called glomelin, which is carbon rich into the soil. Because we have more worms working in this soil, they're pulling the dead material down from the top down, so that's bringing carbon in. And because the roots are deeper, they're emitting that glomelin substance at depth, and it's getting stored. There's less chance of that being disrupted the deeper you go down the soil profile.
Makes sense to me.
This, in our opinion, is a massive opportunity for Irish farming. Irish soils are sequestering carbon, and what we have to find out is how do we measure, manage, and show that.
Right, and these are non-peaty soils.
Non-peaty soils, so mineral soil, all mineral soils in Ireland will have the ability to sequester carbon when managed right.
Right, so Ireland has targets now to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 51% between now and 2030. What do you think farming can do to reduce its emissions in line with these targets without the farmers suffering from this?
We can reduce by 21% in the efficiency of producing beef, say, today without hurting the profitability of the farmer. The second thing that we can do when looking on farm, and we spoke about our trees and our soils, if we can measure and manage them correctly, that we can account for the sequestration that's happening on farm and put that against the emissions that farm is creating, that will bring that 20% to at least 40, if not 50% on every farm in Ireland. That's
So
a game changer.
are you saying that we can reduce all of our agricultural greenhouse gas emissions by 50% if all farmers were to do what you're doing?
Yes, we believe that, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, Duncan. This is about, we need to engage farmers. We need to give farmers the tools, the education, and the know-how how to do this.
It's fantastic to see some of the innovations coming from research scientists like the ones here at Dowth. But these measures only work if we're constantly and permanently increasing carbon sequestration on farms through more hedgerows, more trees, and managing soil carbon. However, Ireland's hedgerows are in long-term decline, and afforestation has almost completely stopped across the country. While most of our soil has the potential to sequester more carbon, a much bigger problem that's not getting enough attention is where 10% of Ireland's grassland is on peaty organic soil,
I should be helping you there.
which when drained is an enormous source of carbon emissions. To give you an idea of how colossal a problem this is, the emissions from these drained peaty soils dwarf the emissions from all of Ireland's transport sector. But is there a solution to this problem?
So 6.3 metres instead of 2 metres.
Yes. Yes.
Here, on this spot.
Yes.
Every metre you go down
Yeah.
is 1,000 years.
Yes.
So you're talking about this was 6,300 years, roughly.
Yes. Yeah. Or more because this is the cutaway. So it probably would have cut away 3-4 metres of the bog.
Right.
So this would have been a very old bog.
And if we leave this drained,
Yes.
what's going to happen to this field?
Just keep oxidising away. CO2 into the air, DOC, dissolved organic carbon, into the water until it hits the water table, which is about a metre or more below at the moment.
So in other words, this will actually reduce down
It'll just
over
decompose.
6 metres, 20 feet.
Oh well, it depends where the water table is.
Oh yes, the
so
water
it'll hit the
table.
water table.
Fine,
So, because what we're doing with it, if we were re-wetting, we're trying to raise the water table back up.
of course.
Dr. Douglas Macmillan and his small team of scientists are exploring what it would take to solve for the emissions from Ireland's peaty farmed grasslands. Today, they're on Coleman Cody's farm in Kilcolman, measuring the depth of his peaty soil.
So Colin, this part of your farm now is peaty soil, is that right?
It will dry out in the summer and it's good grazing ground, and in the winter then it gets wet and the sheep doesn't do well on it and you take them off it. And now the bog is sinking.
The peat soil is essentially disappearing. It's decomposing into the atmosphere and into the waterways.
So this is lowering all the time.
Yes, I mean it's a big source of emissions for Ireland, which is not currently counted in the national accounts. So
For this sort of soil now, what can be done here to solve the problem of the CO2 emissions?
basically the three options that we would be looking at is re-wetting and kind of rewilding, partial re-wetting that you can maintain grazing maybe for less months in the year, or alternative crops, so wet agriculture, polluticulture.
So Coleman, how do you feel now, like 1/10 of your farm, 10 acres here, that would become like a wetland when you block all your drainage? How do you feel about that?
The way that I was brought up was that you worked every bit of ground to get some money out of it.
So Douglas, would it be necessary then to keep this wet all year round?
You can do the full re-wetting, or maybe a partial re-wetting where you bring the water table up but maybe not completely inundate. And I suppose from a biodiversity perspective, it's essentially all of our wetland species that have suffered a lot in relation to intensification of agriculture, so presumably you'd expect to see rare birds, lapwings, curlews, those kind of species that would have been badly affected.
So it has benefits in that way, Coleman. How do you feel about that?
It might be nice to see a bird sanctuary here, but I don't get paid to have a bird sanctuary here. If compensation came in, we might think about it.
Yes, you need to be rewarded for all of the benefits. Enough compensation that you're not losing land and not losing your single farm payment for this part. So that's, I absolutely understand it. Biodiversity, water quality and carbon emissions. By re-wetting, all three of those benefit.
Douglas took me to a neighbouring farm to show me how this peat soil really looks.
So this is just a remnant peat bank. One of the women in the locality who didn't want her peat cut, and this is what's left. Although this, just to bear in mind, it would have shrunk, obviously, as it is very dry. It's well above the water table, so it's shrunk down. So it probably would have been another metre or more.
Right. It's a really good example of what it was like here, you know.
The work of these scientists is invaluable and urgent. If we can use their findings to create policies and support farmers to re-wet these peat soils, it could restore these lands as carbon sinks. It's 10% of our grassland, but is fundamental to meeting our climate responsibilities. If there was a shift in policy towards targeting soil health, soil carbon, and climate mitigation, what could the other 90% of Ireland's grassland look like? Ireland's farming model is not aligned with our climate objectives. I'm on a journey to explore how we could farm more in harmony with nature and address our climate challenge. Here in Sligo, Clive Bright practices what's known as regenerative farming, which at its core focuses on soil health.
As you've seen, when we walked in here, we're in one of the worst parts of the land, really wet, heavy soil. It's kind of just loads of rushes, loads of flaggers. It's not very productive. And because of that, I just planted alder in here and I thought it might be a nice shelter belt. The trees have done their job now. They've kind of repaired the water cycle here. They've got rid of the soil, the kind of stagnant soil that the rushes like. And there's a kind of a fungal soil here now that's working in conjunction with the trees. And there's structure to it. It cycles water properly. And now it's growing grass. So like I'll probably thin this out a little bit, allow more light in for more pasture. And I graze the cattle in here.
This can really bring benefit, but for example, did you get a grant for this?
No, I actually lost money by planting this because I planted this off my own bat outside of any scheme. It's classed as scrub currently.
Scrub?
Yeah.
Isn't it a pity though that the grant doesn't come and try and assist you?
Yeah,
achieve what you're trying to do?
Yeah, that's where I think results-based schemes in the future will allow that.
In conventional intensive farming, there's a large dependence on feed imports as well as fertilisers, where Ireland imports a shocking 4 million tonnes of animal feed every year, which has a significant environmental impact, often coming from tropical rainforest zones. But Clive's approach is different.
Rather than having a very high input production model that's forcing the land and with a lot of inputs of grain and everything else, having more cattle doesn't necessarily mean more income, which is probably a more crucial point.
By using a careful management of holistic mob grazing practices and mixed species sward grasses, Clive is building carbon and biodiversity in his soil while completely cutting out the need for imported feed as well as fertilisers.
Having a more natural system, I think that will naturally lower the herd in a way that suits farmers because they'll be doing it out of a want to do it rather than
being forced to.
Yeah, taking a different approach to it.
So can he still be making a profit?
There's a big issue about the quantity of output or how much you get for the size of an animal or how many animals you have, but nobody really looks at the profit you make per acre, for instance. I make quite a bit of profit per acre.
That's interesting coming from a farmer, because a farmer very seldom says he's making money. You know,
Yeah.
it's not in the instinct of a farmer to say he's making money, and you're actually making a profit.
Well, yeah,
Could most farmers do what you're doing?
I think so, yeah. It's about wanting to do it, I suppose.
Many farmers will need support and better advice for a transition like this. But imagine if this was the goal we set for all cattle farming in Ireland.
If it's so good, why isn't everybody doing this?
Yeah, that's the baffling bit. It's a load less work. I work a very short farming day generally. You don't have to sacrifice nature to get high productivity, quite high productive within a natural system and within a natural ecology.
Clive has demonstrated that less inputs of feed and fertiliser has both reduced the emissions from his farm while increasing the value of his product. With dairy being the biggest growth area in farming emissions in Ireland today. I'm going back to Donald Sheehan's dairy farm to see how this sector can react to Ireland's climate targets.
So, Donald, this is a species-rich grassland, or would you call it a wildflower meadow?
It's a kind of a 12-month biodiversity plot. And so it draws in bumblebees, butterflies, honeybees, solitary bees, and then on top of that, when they're finished, then you'll have the wild birds coming in, because there's so much cover there.
It's absolutely beautiful, though. And you can do this, you can manage it, your farm.
The line where the wire is, this is where I make my money from. This is the intensive side where cows are grazed every 3 weeks, and this side is left to nature. I'm providing food for pollinators, food for wild birds, carbon sequestration. There's no pesticides going on it, and it's costing me money. There's 2 acres here, so that's 2 cows gone.
Is there any single farm payment for that?
No, so this is redlined, what they call redlined out of the single farm payment.
So that's taken out of your single farm payment also?
Yeah. So
you have 2 losses there.
You do, yeah. The eligibility system that we have for cap payments or for subsidies, they pay on the good land you have, the productive land. So really, that's the kind of a duplicate payment, because I'm already getting paid from the income I'm receiving from cows milking off of this grass.
Yeah.
But this is what needs to be. This is what needs to be the subsidy. This is where the subsidy needs to come.
Zero plant value in every way.
No,
treat on this.
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
The lobby groups, the agri press, they're all going to be pushing and advising farmers to produce more, because that's the way farming works. And until there's payments for leaving areas aside for the other ecosystem services that farmers can provide, well, the advice isn't going to change either.
So the farmer is not being treated fairly?
Absolutely. Here. Farmers have disadvantaged land. They mightn't be as productive as what I am here, but they might be producing an awful lot more biodiversity, or they might be sequestering an awful lot more carbon, or their water quality might be an awful lot better. So we need to be paid for the ecosystem services that these areas are providing. They're also part of the rural communities that we all live in.
Absolutely.
And if they go,
the small farmers are the lifeblood of Ireland.
They are, absolutely. If they go, rural Ireland is gone.
What I've experienced on this journey is that farmers are not to blame, but that we've incentivised our agri-food system to go in the wrong direction. Supporting hedgerow management, new forestry, agroforestry, mixed species swards, soil carbon sequestration, and biofuels like biogas are just some of what we need more of to help meet our climate change targets, which now couldn't be more urgent.